I would know as a joke. Everything could be written down as a short story. It's amazing. It's amazing. And when the war is over, I invite everyone to come to Privos and try the cherries. And I also describe it in my novel that I will bring here because it stayed with me forever. On Saturdays, people go dancing in the main street. Like half of Odessa comes to the main street, which is called Deribasovskaya. There's a city garden there. There's an orchestra playing, and there are street musicians. And then everybody's dancing. Anybody from toddler to very, advanced and aged people, even with the walking cane, and everybody's dancing to the best of their ability. And when I share these videos and I share them on Twitter or somewhere else on social media, I often get back the remarks like, look at them dancing. I mean, there's no war going on. Why are they doing this? And they're young people, young men who should be serving at the front, or some such remarks. So, first of all, the young men who are dancing there are not of age. There are a lot of school children there who still go to school. And second of all, the war needs the civilian part. It needs the production, it needs the volunteers, it needs the hospitals working, infrastructure working. So there's a lot of people who are not at the front, but are contributing to the whole country effort to defend Ukraine. And second or third of all, I forgot the number, but it's just the spirit of Odessa, and that's how they fight. That's Odessa resistance. Dancing, singing, eating. I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes, and they're funny and they are not, because that's not what should be happening. So one of them, I'm sitting at the beach, beautiful beach at Black Sea called Langeron. Of course, you can't swim in the sea because there are mines there floating, and people who dare to go there get occasionally blown up in pieces. Happen to a lot of people, but people still do. It's Odessa, so they go anyway. So I'm sitting on Sundays, I take my work there, so I'm sitting in a very nice cafe, and I got myself an Aperol, and it's a nice summer day last year, sometimes at the end of the June. And then you hear this, explosion. And I don't know if many people here have heard an explosion, but it's very loud, and there's a lot of glass flying, and there's a shock wave, and like your glass is shaking and everything is going. And then I see everybody's running, and I'm like, oh my God, finally, Odessa people are going for safety. They're going to a bomb shelter. And I start running, I grab my laptop and I start running with everyone. And then I look, and I listen to what they're saying. And they're running outside of the restaurant to take a selfie with a cloud of the missile that was just destroyed by the air defense. And as we run, the person next to me, the guy is saying, talking to the waiter and saying, don't worry, we're just going to take a selfie. We're going to come back, finish our drinks. We're going to pay. So don't you worry. And it's a typical Odessa. The other time I was working for Privos, with which you're already familiar from the farmer's market, in the street, and there's a drone there, Iranian-made drone, which is nicknamed moped for a reason, because it makes the sound like a moped. I'm not going to reproduce the sound, but you can imagine, right? It's very loud. It sounds like a moped flying through the sky, and they're flying pretty low. They're not big, but both missiles and drones are dangerous, and people don't know it here, that even when they are destroyed, there is debris. And the debris is falling down on people. And that's how you can get killed. And that's why it's funny. Everybody's laughing at moped. They call them balalaikas. But it's not funny because it can kill you if you are in the wrong place. But because we have so many of balalaikas, I see these three men sitting there drinking beer outside at a nice table in a street cafe. And I see it's like a film, like a movie. I see a man with his bottle of beer going like this, and at the same time the drone is going poof, like this with the sound, and he doesn't even stop. The bottle of beer keeps going, and he only puts it down once he's done with his drink. and the drone by this time is gone. I don't know where the debris goes. Well, what do? Being a journalist, I take pictures of everything. So whenever there is an explosion, everybody, well, in Odessa, it doesn't go for a bomb shelter, but trying to get to a wall or inside. And I'm running like, where is it? Where is it? Which is really stupid. And I know that I shouldn't be doing that, but that's how sometimes you get the pictures that I was going to show you. And I know you will get to see it, and you will get to see them in the movie. And it's not a trick. I actually was going to show them to you. So that's Odessa. And add to it beautiful gardens and blossoming flower beds downtown. And the fact that the downtown Odessa was just recently inscribed on the UNESCO historical heritage list. I was there during the procedure. It was very moving. There was a little stela open. And so now the downtown, which has a lot of influence, Italian and Greek and French, and it's such a mixture. Sometimes it's, pretty out there, like it's like extreme Rococo, if you know what I mean. But it has its own. It's Odessa. And so I was so happy that it got inscribed on that list. Why? It has a practical meaning. Because if Russia decides to hit the downtown, the historical downtown, they will have to pay reparation. That will be a crime. There will be a precedent to go for a trial. And of course, from everything that Russians have done so far, there's no rhyme or reason to what they do, and they can do pretty much anything they desire to do. So it's only fair to protect this precious city. And as much as I want to keep talking about Odessa forever, I'm going to move on to other cities. And I know that for many people in California and in the States in general, there would be at least one person here, or several people here, who'd say, oh, my grandmother was from Ukraine, or my grandmother was from a shtetl in Ukraine, or I don't know if you've experienced that, but it happens a lot. So why don't we move towards Kiev? It's a little bit towards east, I suppose, like east-north, to a little town called Uman. And I really like the name. It's so poetic, Uman, like a poem. It's a small town, and what's one of the most interesting thing about Uman is not that my ancestors were from there, they were Jews from Uman, but that there's still Jews in Uman living in the Hasidic district. And what happens there, every September, there's the New Year's Rosh Hashanah, right, celebration. And at that time, Hasidic Jews from all around the world flock to Uman, and they did so this year during the war. And I was there to report. And that was fascinating, although that was one of the most extreme moments where I actually had to have a security guard with me, but not to protect me from the Russians, but to protect me from the Hasidic Jewish man who didn't like to have women during the celebration. So I respected everything. I wore a scarf, and I have my accreditations, like all possible accreditations, but I had a big Ukrainian policeman with a big gun walking right behind me. And it was wonderful because I got like the best of Uman. I got to, the Hasidic Jews wouldn't speak to me because it's not allowed. You cannot do it. But I had a wonderful conversation with the Ukrainian cop who was telling me all about it because he's been protecting this festival for the last 20 years. So he knows all about it. And he knows about the dynamics of people, the local residents' relationship with this district, because it grew quite, it's a quite large district. Ironically, the street is called Pushkin Street. Pushkin is one of the most beloved Russian poets. So some of these things don't make sense anymore. But it was a very joyous moment, at least for them, not for me, because I was afraid, but and I've never been to such celebration before, so I discovered a lot of new things. Singing was beautiful, and the reason they come there, which I forgot to mention, is because there is a tzaddik's grave there, and I'm such a bad Jew. I forgot the name of the tzaddik, but he's very famous. Does anybody know? Do you know? Nachman. Yes, Nachman. I was taken to the women part, and I actually, paid my respect to Tzaddik Nachman, but I'm not religious at all. And I respected, my ancestors were from there. I found the building in which they had their business, actually, so it was very personally significant. But what really mattered there is that I spoke to a lot of local people who were not Jewish, to Ukrainian people. And in Uman, unlike some other towns, people actually speak Ukrainian. Children at the playground speak Ukrainian. Grandmothers at the little benches speak Ukrainian. It's a Ukrainian-speaking area. And I was asking, how do they feel about this Jewish celebration, especially during the war? And everybody was very, very welcoming and friendly. And I also spoke to those who spoke to me from the Hasidic Jewish community, and they confirmed that there is no accidents, at least this year. It all went pretty peaceful. I think there was one Italian woman, journalist, who got in trouble, but that was because, it's a different matter. So it was good to observe it. It was good to write about it, and it was good to report it. I have a video report for one of the outlets that I'm reporting for, because there's a lot of rumors that you will hear and a lot of narratives that the Kremlin is pushing, that Ukrainians are Nazis. Well, in a Nazi country, in a Nazi city, there wouldn't be a whole big district of Hasidic Jews dancing for days. So I was glad to bring this evidence, and I will share these pictures later in the Facebook event. And I actually managed to speak to a Jewish Ukrainian commander of I forgot exactly what it is, but it was like a small military unit, territorial defense, which consists of religious Jews, Ukrainian religious Jews, who are protecting Ukraine, and they were there for the celebration. Yeah, no problem. So since we are on the subject, we're gonna move more east and north, and so I don't have the map of Ukraine, but this is pretty much like this. And we started in Odessa here, and we're going up. So we stopped in Uman, and we're going to Kiev. It's another 2.5 hours by bus. That's how I usually travel. And then if you go about an hour, can go by bus. No buses going there. But if you go get a special permit, you'll find yourself in Chernobyl. And everybody perhaps heard about Chernobyl. Now, I have been around Chernobyl when the accident happened in 1986. And I'm not going to go into details, but there will be an essay coming. If you want to know, contact me. I'll send you a lot about Chernobyl. I wrote a lot about it. But I wanted to go there during the war because I wanted to investigate the rumor that the Russian soldiers, after invading Ukraine from Belarusian side, dug trenches in the Rudy or Red, sometimes it's called forest, which is the most nuclear radioactive part of the Chernobyl alienation zone. So I wanted to find out as a journalist whether it's a rumor or whether it really happened. And it was very hard to get a permit, but I have my connections. So I was very lucky to get there after 3 weeks wait. And sure enough, they did it. I was there very close to the trenches, and I got the report from the agency that is in charge of the ecological safety of the area. And I interviewed the director, and I had the formal documents and the proof and the, the space satellite photos and the whole evidence that whether they were not aware of what happened there in 1986, and just in, outside case somebody doesn't know about it, there was the biggest man-made nuclear catastrophe in the world, right? In 1986, when the nuclear reactor blew up. And so the area is still radioactive, and pretty much everybody knows it. And some areas are more radioactive than others. And so the most radioactive one is Red Forest, and that's where they set their camp, and they were digging the earth, God only knows why. They also did something very peculiar. They were stealing the radioactive toilet seats from the Pripyat apartment. Pripyat is a satellite town of Chernobyl where nobody lives for 30 years and everything is frozen in time because people were evacuated from there when it happened at the end of April, on the 2nd of May, I believe in 1986, and it's too dangerous to go there and touch anything, so just preserve there as is. So the locals and the guide showed me, and I have the pictures of that, 2 toilet seats that were not there any time before the Russians' arrival. And now, unfortunately, you might have heard it or read it too, that a lot of Russian military come from very impoverished areas, and they do a lot of looting. And they do a lot of looting of washing machine, home appliances, as well as toilet seats. So this was no exception, but apparently nobody told them that these red seats were radioactive. So why did they drop these 2 seats? We don't know, because they didn't leave any notes or anything. But perhaps they just didn't fit into the trucks or something like this, because they did loot the whole laboratory. And I did a report on that. So I was quite appalled to find out that the Alenation Chernobyl zone, which is still extremely dangerous because there's nuclear waste there on site, is only protected by the self-made computers made of the 90s parts by the local engineers, Ukrainian engineers, because the Russians looted all the super modern equipment that was there before. And it's still the situation there. So fingers crossed, nothing happens. These engineers are very savvy, but the site of the laboratory was quite something. From Chernobyl, there's a lot of stories I can tell you about Chernobyl, including the fox who lives there and comes to beg for sandwiches because the extreme tourists used to bring it, but now there's no one there, and the fox has to go back to eating mice and stuff. But we'll probably move to Kiev briefly because it's the capital of Ukraine, and somebody's grandma must have been from Kiev here. Yeah, I see some. Yeah, here you go. It's a beautiful city. It's an ancient city. I'm not going to go into history. We don't have time here. But what I can share with you is that it's very well kept. And okay, I'm going to say it, and some might not like it, but Kiev looks much better than San Francisco. It's clean. They clean it. It's sparkling. You can eat off the ground. There are flowers everywhere. There are windows everywhere. The shops are open when they're not closed for air raids. Because what happens when the air raid starts? Everything in some cities, in most cities, have to close. So for example, if you're out there to buy some milk or tomato soup or whatever, and you just made it to the store, and the Russians decide to bring their plane off the ground in Belarus, the siren starts howling like, ow, ow. And that means that you can't buy this milk or tomato soup, and sometimes for 5 hours. And sometimes longer, because lately these air raids have been going for a very long time and a lot. And of course, it's always a problem, and I admit to it. The way I make it through things that I see is I drink cognac at night, not a lot, but some. So I need to go and buy my cognac, but there's a curfew, so everything closes. These days is 11, sometimes 12, and depending on the city. Before it used to be 6 or 7, and they stop selling alcohol, depending on the city, 6 or 7. And if you work all day and you come to the store and it's 5 p.m. and the air raid starts, you're not going to get your cognac, and it's very maddening. So, and nobody's going to sell it to you. And of course, there are areas that are dry, like the frontline cities where we are about to visit. They are dry. There's no alcohol sold there. However, even though alcohol is available in Kiev, you don't see very many drunks, surprisingly. You'd think you would, but you don't. It's it's very civilized, and I actually always felt very safe, apart from the missiles, walking downtown Kiev, even at midnight. Well, no, I can walk at midnight because I have my accreditation, and journalists are allowed to stay past curfew, although it's not a good idea. But let's say after dark, not as a journalist. So it's a safe place. People are nice. Uh, People try their best, and some succeed, and some are still working on it, to switch to Ukrainian from Russian, because traditionally a lot of people spoke Russian in big cities. Now this is changing because people understandably don't want to speak the language of the country of aggressor. And I'm also studying Ukrainian. I speak it badly, but I speak it, and we all speak, and people, you know, encourage it, and they say, oh, don't worry, we'll all make mistakes, we're all learning. And lately, Kiev has been attacked like never before during the war. It started in November with the massive missile attacks. And lately, actually, since I left, there were a lot of drone attacks every night. And again, the debris of missiles and drones fall down, and they kill people, and they kill children. And they destroy buildings, they destroy residential quarters. It's always civilians. And what I want to say here is, many times as you arrive to the site to report, you are trying to locate military objects. You cannot report it right away because it's a military situation. There's, you know, the operational silence. But it's important for journalists to establish whether the Russians are targeting military objects, as they say, or whether they are just terrorizing civilians at night. And every single time that I have arrived somewhere, there was no evidence of military objects, be it in Kiev, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Uman, you name it, any city. So that's my experience. So at this point, and we are investigating that in the movie that I'm going to present on June 19th. Our whole team is following the chemical weapon usage case to see whom are they targeting and whether it's a crime against humanity. So moving from Kiev up north to Kharkov, which is very, very close to the Russian border, just 40 kilometers, which is, somebody help me, 50 miles, right?
4 miles.
Yeah, from the border, very, very close. And there are a lot of connections there. People on both sides used to have families and go back and forth, you know how it often happens when the countries are so close. Now it's a dead zone. I've been very close to the border. In fact, our GPS lost signal and we almost made it to Belgrade. If you follow in the events, that's where the Russian volunteer group is lately attacking. So my friend, journalist, and I almost made it, but we turned around, you know, on time not to be there. So it's very close. And because of this proximity, the Kharkov air defense doesn't have a chance to stop the attacks from the air the way they can do it in Odessa or in Kiev, or say in Lviv, which is very west of Ukraine. There's simply not enough time, and there's no capability technically to do that. And because of that, Kharkov has been hit really, really hard. And in the beginning of the invasion, the Russian military made it almost to Kharkov. They actually entered parts of Kharkov, and there's still the ruins of the building, of the schools in particularly, that they managed to destroy. And there's this place there that I want to note called Saltivka. And that's the area that looks totally like post-apocalyptic movie. I mean, there are parts of buildings taken out. Sometimes the wall slides and you can see in people's apartments. And you think, you know, you see them sometimes in the pictures in the news, but you don't realize how many of them are there. You just drive by and you see in people's apartments. You see in their bedrooms, you see the beds, sometimes you see the kitchen with the plates. In Dnipro, we actually saw, and it was there for a while, the plate with the apples. I think it was reported for a while in the yellow kitchen. But I have seen a lot that never were reported. The same went for Kiev suburbs, say in Borodyanka or Hostomel or Buchil. The destroyed houses, like burned down completely or partly destroyed. And in Borodyanka, I've been in the apartments with the former residents who are picking up their childhood memories, like a little figurines, and I have the memories of that. That's heartbreaking. So in Kharkov, there is the whole area like this called Saltovka. And what is the most astonishing is that people still live there. So there will be a part of the building, like say this is the bookshelf, right? So this part, San Francisco, would be complete ruins and it looks like, a sci-fi movie. And here you see people washing their windows. And it's just really hard to process. But they have nowhere else to go. B, they don't want to leave. I speak to a lot of people. They say, this is our home. These people come here and they want to have our property, our homes. We're not going to have it. We're going to just live here. And in Kharkov, like in Odessa and Kiev, there's nightlife. But because Kharkov was way more under attack, it will be underground. So it looks like if anybody watched Cabaret, right? Like it's a cabaret type setting in the basement. And the music is amazing. And, so that's Kharkov. Experience I had near Kharkov is one of the most gruesome and hard that I had, maybe one of them, throughout this last 15 months, because I went to report from the exhumation of mass graves in Izum on the last day when it was about to be done. So there were 447 bodies. And on the day that I was there were like about 5 bodies it's a long process. There's a lot of people in their hazmat suits. The most, so it's going to be graphic, but there are no pictures. So, the most depressing or scary part about it is actually not the site. Although you do get, as a journalist, you do get to see the remains, the human remains. But the smell, the odor of the mass grave is something that stays with you for months, if not forever. I washed my gear because they still shoot in there. So you have to wear your helmet and your bulletproof vest. And you can't throw it away because it's $1,000, you're not going to buy it. So I washed it like 5 times and I couldn't stand near it because it was haunting me. I even wrote an article speaking to different experts, neuroscientists and perfume experts. Why is it so disturbing? Because it wasn't just me. Everybody, all the journalists who were reporting there, all the volunteers or civil workers there report the same, that the worst part is the smell. And so there's this article out there that was, I guess that was the way for me to process the smell. And so eventually, like 6 or 7 months after that, when I was running somewhere in the trenches, from the smoke and stuff, the smells finally subsided. I still have the same gear. And it was a profound and existential experience. There was a priest there, and I'm not a religious person. And I was interested to interview the priest because he was there with his prayers and like with a little, what do you call it, like cadillo? Censer over the black bags, including the small bags with the children. And I asked him, how is it possible to believe in any kind of deity that would allow for this to happen? And he said something, but I didn't resonate or register, and I cannot tell you what he said. I have it on tape. There's a video on that, what he's saying. But it was something very elusive. It didn't make sense to me. I don't think he knew. I mean, I think it was basically like that faith is not being questioned. It's there and it helps many people, of which I do agree. It does help many people. And when I speak to locals who lost their loved ones in this mass grave at the cemetery, they very often turn to faith. And I respect that because these people have to have something to turn to. It's unspeakable. Also near Kharkov, but not in Izum, and very recently, just in April, like a couple of months ago, right? Months ago, I went on an expedition with the Ukrainian military crew to get the bodies of the Russian soldiers that they don't collect. They leave them there. They leave them there behind. There are several reasons why they do it. One of them, they don't want to pay compensation for the families because the military is called missing in action. They don't have the responsibility to pay. The other reason is they don't want to show the statistics, which is normal during the war. Ukrainian side also is not showing statistics. It's just the common law in war, but that helps when you don't pick up the bodies. Not only they don't pick up the bodies, they're actually trying to destroy the evidence. So when I was in Kharkov, there was a reported bombing of the carriage, refrigerator carriers, where the Russian bodies, Russian soldiers' bodies were contained. So the Russians bombed their own bodies. And I'm writing an article about it. I'm doing the investigation and talking to the officials and to the prosecutor. It's not, this is based on the reports. I know that much, but in order for it to be a valid article, you have to have the material. It will appear, that it's a gruesome topic, but it's a big subject. It's actually environmental because there are so many human remains in Ukraine now that you cannot tell whether they're more of the human remains or the mines, which mostly Russian leave when they retreat, and sometimes Ukrainians also have to plant to stop the offensive. So as a result, traveling around there is very dangerous. Like you can't step right or left, like when I was walking in a Zoom and making my report. I knew not to step off the path because, the mines. So moving on from this subject, I had to touch on that because it's a part of the war and it's not being talked about. And here I'll say something which I've been thinking about a lot since I came to America and to Europe back. If I write a next book, it will be called The Inconvenient War. Because I find it a very common thing when people write to me and say, oh, we would love to come to your film or your presentations or read your article, but it is very disturbing. We don't want to hear about it. It's inconvenient. And I understand it. It's a sensitive matter. People have traumas. People have defense. I respect it. There's a lot of psychology here. It's understandable. On the other hand, I come from the place where people don't have the luxury of not being inconvenienced. They don't want to be triggered either. But every night a missile comes and it might hit you or it might take your loved ones. And this movie that I'm going to show in Hollywood and then in San Francisco, 14th and 19th, I follow up with the people that we interview always. I talk to them. So since we made the movie, one woman lost her husband. He was killed. A man in Kherson, whose house was attacked with a chemical weapon, is now, right now, as I speak, out there in a rubber boat trying to save as many animals and residents right now as we speak. One person got an award from Zelensky, the one who gave me a tip, so that's a good thing. There's some good news along with the bad ones. But whatever it is, you don't have the luxury of not knowing about the war. And that's an open question. I don't like, I'm not a propagandist. I wrote a lot about propaganda throughout my life. But I think I am a writer, and I think it's a moral decision for each person to decide how much are you a part of the whole world and how much of this inconvenience you can take and how much you can't take. And it's a personal decision. And I'm not here or anywhere else to tell anybody what to do, but I'm very grateful for you that you inconvenienced yourself to come here, to listen to this often disturbing things and not leave. It's really appreciated. I have a lot of respect for that. Thank you. So no clapping. And and clapping for you maybe. But of course, there are many, many other cities. I didn't make it to Kherson yet. There's a lot there and a lot of gloomy subjects like torture, and stuff like that. But I talked for a while, and I can talk all night long maybe. I spent there 15 months. So I just want to open it to the questions.
Are you embedded? How do you travel safely?
Thank you. Good question. And like other journalists there, I'm accredited. You have to have accreditation with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and then the local one. And only then, once you have it, you can go. And I sometimes take buses to cities. I like taking buses. They're very comfortable. You have internet. I write a report a day, so I write reports on bus all the time. Or I travel with fellow journalists, with crews. There could be anything from The Guardian to Polish television to my own byline time crew when we were making the movie. And we help each other because I speak both languages. I sometimes can help them to arrange something, which I'm arranging for myself anyway, and they will take me for the ride. But you can, when you get close to the front line, on which I didn't touch at all, but that will be in the movie because we traveled to Donbass and we traveled in eastern Ukraine a lot, to Kramatorsk and Konstantinovka and very close to Bakhmut. There you cannot take a bus. You go with the military. You cannot just go. You have to arrange it with the press officer. And sometimes you get stuck. Oftentimes you get stuck. Like in the movie, you will see we had a French television crew and British television crew, which is mine. And we got stuck up to our ears in the mud. And we had to have a big truck which was making trenches right next to us with Russians like plummeting us, like all around. There was an income and outcome and all kind of fire, which you cannot tell unless you're military. You have no idea. Somebody's telling you it's a lie. You just don't know. It's a lot of noise and you don't know if it's coming to you, if they're shooting. And they had to drag our cars out, and then we had to walk on foot through the mud. And then you are there at the front line.
I was telling some friends of mine who are Afghan refugees that I was coming to this tonight, and we've been getting about 50 women and human rights defenders and LGBT out from Afghanistan. And one of the things they wanted me to convey to you is their respect for the Ukrainian people standing and fighting for their country, and their leaders not fleeing and leaving them in a mess. So I'd love for you to just describe a little bit, what is the spirit of the Ukrainian people? We hear that they seem very resolute and determined, but I'd just love to hear.
Well, thank you. It's a great question because it's, of course, I've heard the spirit of Ukrainian people receiving an award, and what is it? Like, how exactly it's going to happen? Like, the spirit's going to materialize. But, there is such a thing. And it's hard to put in words. It's quite intangible. But it is, on the other hand, very certain. So I'll try to do it. So let's say you arrive to a place that just was bombed. So everything is covered in dust and splinters. There's shattered windows. People lost all their belongings. There could be dead animals. What do they do, right? And different folks would do different things. Well, from my experience, 100% of Ukrainians, they don't cry, they don't complain, they start cleaning. And one of my favorite, probably my favorite pictures, that I think we shared it on the announcement on the Bird and Beckett. You see it every time when there would be this black smoke, everything is on fire, and there is this lady, old lady, who is standing upside down like this, weeding and cleaning and taking care of her garden. And that for me is just, it's not mind-blowing anymore, but that's the spirit of Ukrainian people. They're also very dignified, and like they don't want what's not theirs, but they're not giving to you what's theirs. That they're not giving to you, they're not giving to me, they're not giving it to Russians. They just want their country. They want their freedom. And that's probably the most defining feature of Ukrainian people, because they were Cossacks, and they're freedom loving. You cannot, like, that's why I work for a Ukrainian newspaper. Sometimes it's hard to be in a staff meeting because everybody's screaming at each other. Everybody wants their freedom. And it's going to be like, it could be fierce because they say we're like 3 Ukrainians and 4 hetmans, which is like 4 bosses. Like everybody's like, no, I know, they've very strong. And it has, of course, good and bad. But in this case, that's what makes people so invincible. And overall, it's just remarkable. I mean, I love being there because there's also an incredible capability of organize from the bottom that I have not seen anywhere else, like grassroots, right, movement. I've seen, like, experience it in the place where I live. Downstairs from me is a travel agency. So sometimes they would just gather there, people who used to be journalists or tour guides, and they put together this group, and they just like have a staff meeting, they put together some money, they come up with the rules, that nobody tells them to do this. There's no reason to do it other than that's what they do. And as a result, there are these volunteer structures everywhere, very strong, working in the hospitals, helping the military. Incredible thing, very poetic actually, is making camouflage networks. The whole country is weaving camouflage nets in churches, in synagogues, outside in the theaters. Nobody pays them for that. They get the material just, wherever they can, and they weave it. And I saw why, because when you go to the front line, it's a war of drones. So the drones are there surveying the area, and they want to find the equipment. And if you have these nets, in winter they are white, in summer they are green, and so on, they cannot see it, because I've been to a polygon where they were testing it. We were testing it, and yeah, they can cover them completely. And so nobody tells Ukrainian people to come together to a church or a synagogue and make nets every day. They just go and do it. And that's also is the spirit of Ukrainian people. I don't know if I answered that.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Did you get an opportunity, or did someone you know get an opportunity to talk to any Russian soldiers who came under the presumption of what they were going to go and see and do, who had their heads turned around when they got there?
As a matter of fact, I did. I'm working on an interview right now, and it was very hard to obtain. So it's very dangerous for a person who's being interviewed. So I'm not going to give any details, but sometime soon there will be an article on that, yeah. But obviously these Russian soldiers are not in Russia or in Ukraine anymore. They had the way to escape. Yeah, that's going to be a very interesting article. I'm very excited to be working on that.
What is the situation for seniors? I mean, I would imagine with all the young men going to the front and the evacuation of young women and children, that the senior population must be huge.
Yes, that is correct. I mean, there's still quite a lot of women, children, and men of the age, of conscript age, who are still not at the front. They are there. But yes, it's especially hard for the hotspots and for the areas that are being afflicted the most, say in Donbass, because most people who are staying in the villages in eastern Ukraine are elderly. And for the most part, they don't want to leave. They don't want to leave because they lived there all their life, and they're constantly, both the military and the police and volunteers, and I've been on these rides, on the rescue rides, it's actually in the movie, they go to the villages and plead, please leave. It's not safe here, you will be killed. And people go, oh, no, you'll see it in the movie. I lived here all my life, my children are in safety. I have my little goat and I have my little cow and they're my children. I'm not gonna live here. I'm gonna die when I'm gonna die. The God is gonna know when I'm gonna die. So, and it's of course very hard because the conditions are not at all conducive to any kind of good quality living. There is no medical care left. Whatever's left, Russians again are attacking them, like we were in Kramatorsk, reporting from the health center that Russians destroyed. So, boom, in that area, there's no more place to go. And even if there was like one or two medical professionals or health professionals, I know some friends of mine here in the Bay Area who have an organization helping the seniors in Ukraine. And I think it's a very good thing to do. But yeah, it's a drastic situation.
I have a question about you. Did you feel prejudice against you for being a Russian in Ukraine asking these questions? You yourself admit you don't speak perfect Ukrainian. You're Russian.
I'm not Russian, so I can't answer it in full. I'm actually Jewish, and my ancestors were from Ukraine, and I even have some Ukrainian blood in me. So, and I never identified as a Russian. Those of you who know me or who read my books, I mean, I did grow up partially in St. Petersburg, but it was a very anti-Semitic place, so I never felt Slavic in any way, shape, or form, which now I'm very happy about. And so, like, yes, thank you. However, I do admit, I never make it a secret, and you can Google me. It's a very easy Google. The first thing you see that I was born in St. Petersburg and went to a school there. I say it and I explain that I've been fighting Putin's regime openly and publicly from 2012. I don't go to Russia. I don't publish in Russian. I never had published in Russian. Again, those of you who know me know that. It's a chosen position. I don't write in Russian. Actually, don't think in Russian when we speak English at home. And it's, again, I knew what was coming. I've been screaming about Putin's regime on every corner here in San Francisco since 2012 very loudly, annoying everybody. So it's very easily found on, it's an open world, and people do check me, in order to get accreditations for Ministry of Defense and also for local accreditations. They always look at what I do and they ask questions. They just yesterday, a movie critic asked me, what is your connection with Ukraine? We have ethical reasons here, and I respect that, and I always answer that and give the honest answer. The only 3 times which I was singled out and humiliated as presumably an enemy was by Americans, actually, American journalists. No, never by Ukrainian. And to continue on that, because I always admit that I'm Jewish, I have never experienced any anti-Semitic instances as well. They're always very respectful. Yeah. Good question. Yes, Steve.
In terms of turning heads, is there a difference between your impression of Europe and America as far as certain pacifist groups and their sort of support for Russia or ambivalent support for Ukraine?
I know what you're saying. I know it very well because one of the newspapers that I'm writing for, Fresno's Community Alliance, it's very, very left. And there are a lot of people on editorial board who have these views. But because it's a democratic country and they respect all opinions, I'm able to be publishing there my views along with something that makes my hair stand on end. But that's how democracy works. In terms of whether it's different in Europe or America, no, I don't think there is a significant difference, and I've been dealing with it. I've studied it. My last article in Fresno Community Alliance is about that. There's what they call a horseshoe effect. They're far right and they're far left. And strangely, they come very close to each other, and they somehow parrot the Kremlin narrative one way or another, although it's not quite clear how is it even possible for them to be so similar in their views when they're so different. But that's, it's a long story, probably not the subject for this discussion, but brown-red coalition is a thing, and it's the same in America and in Europe. In Italy, for instance, And it has a long tradition, and it also has the trace of Russian money all over it. So I wrote about that. If somebody is interested about it, you can email me. I can forward you what I found out, and there's a lot of people who wrote more about it. So
I'm very impressed that you were able to get to Fresno's newspaper there and turn their heads. I think you're able.
I had my connections. No, but I mean, I think they respect the multiple opinions, which is great. I mean, there's no censorship. They might disagree with me and write angry letters to me, but that's a part of the conversation. That's good. Yes?
Do you have a sense of public sentiment in Russia about the war in Ukraine? Like, do you think the people there have any sense of what's really going on, or is the sort of media presentation blanketing out what's happening?
I don't know, Rachel. I mean, it's a good question. I stopped following Russia before the war even, and definitely during the war. I cannot tolerate it. I mean, I basically know what they are saying. There's no reason for me to go in detail. I don't have any respect for this country or its population. It's, again, everybody's different. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. It's just the way I am. I don't have, at this point, much compassion because I think, you know, unless somebody has a paralyzed relative or, you know, somebody they're taken care of and can't leave, they're either in prison for protesting or they have left. If they're still there and they are not, you know, they don't have the circumstances for which they can't leave, I personally think they're complicit. There is many opinions as there are people. This is my personal opinion. What do they hear? They probably hear a bunch of propaganda. Can they reach YouTube and open internet through VPN? They can. Do they do it? I don't know, and I'm not a good judge of that. I don't go to that country. I don't go to their websites. I lost connection very long time ago. So this is actually says it here. It's a famous from Privoz, from the farmer market. And for those of you who doesn't know, it says Russian military ship go yourself. Which is a boss. Oh, do you know? Like maybe I'll finish up with the anecdote, and if there are questions, I'll answer it. But it's a marvelous anecdote, and I'm looking forward to actually interview the person who came up with this. In the very beginning of the war, during the first 3 days or so, the Russian military ship was approaching Odessa from the Black Sea, close to the place called Zmeiny Ostrov, which is a snake island, where a small group of border patrol were guarding Odessa. And so the ship approaches and it says, like through the loudspeaker, Ukrainian border patrol squad, you are surrounded. If you don't surrender now, you will be prosecuted. Please surrender now. And then the one of the patrol guy, he says like, Russian military ship, go yourself. And that went on that went everywhere. Then it was actually there was the end of the story because the news had it that they were all killed. And it was very tragic, and we all grieved and mourned over them. But then it turned out that actually they were not killed. They were taken prisoners of wars, and then they were exchanged. So now all of these guys are back, including, and my friend knows the guy who said it, and she said he's the most quiet, modest, shy guy. He said, you want to interview him? He's not going to say anything at all. He just, you know, that's all he said. So, yeah, yes. Well, there's a lot of bad stories about the Red Cross that I've heard interviewing people. I've heard from people whom I can't trust, although I didn't see it personally. that the Red Cross offices were closed in Kiev at the time when they were needed. I know that they were going to the Russian-controlled territories. But I did not investigate Red Cross, so I better not say it, just an anecdote. I did write articles about several big humanitarian aid companies, including Carnitas, I think, Caritas? Caritas. Yeah, Caritas. And I went to several offices around Ukraine, and I've seen them in action. Actually, it was one of the picture where they distribute the necessary goods for people, internally displaced people. And I spoke to the general manager. So yeah, I think this is working really well. There are a lot of local, kind of medium-sized. Say, when Mykolaiv had no water for about 9 months, they had no drinking water. And I was there during the time, you know, like you had to buy a bottle of water to wash your hair once a week or something like that, and to drink you only, you know. And so, but to deliver this drinking water, you had to bring it from somewhere. So we mostly were bringing it from Odessa. And so there were organizations involved in that. And sometimes they're not getting recognized because in Mykolaiv, people were very angry. They were bombed every day. There was no water, no electricity. It was very, very hard. And so one time we were filming the line of people standing for water with their bottles, and they don't want to be filmed. There's one time actually when people were aggressive and they said, "Why did you come here?" And I'm with the Polish-American television crew. It's like, "Why did you come here? Did you come to humiliate us? Did you come to make fun of us? Where is your help?" And then I look up and I have a picture of that, and it on the big water tank it says, "From American people to Ukraine." So sometimes people, and I don't blame them, they are so angry and exhausted and living in inhumane condition. Like in Odessa, we didn't have electricity, internet, and heat for months. Obviously, you're not going to read what it says. You're just going to be angry. So yeah, but I don't know that if I answered your question, but that's based on my knowledge. Yeah, there was some. Yeah.
I want to ask you, when there was an earthquake in Turkey, there was sent many rescue teams from all over the world, and now when we have disaster in Nova Kakhovka hydroelectric station, I don't see any news that there are sent some rescue teams, and I want to ask you as a journalist why it seems like a world is a bit ignorant to this catastrophe, but it's actually catastrophe because there are even 1 hour ago I read that there are confirmed dead people, and it's a really concerning situation. I understand that it's maybe dangerous, but they can come like from right bank, yes, where it is controlled territory by Ukraine.
I have an answer for you because I've been there many, many times, right on the bank. You can't, and they probably shouldn't, because there are Russian snipers on the other side, and they see you. I mean, we've been shot at working on the report. You'll see the in the film. So, and we've been under fire on the right side because the river is narrow enough for them to get you. And as the rescuers were working on getting people out of the water, there were explosions coming at the same time. I was talking to my friends. So they fire at Kherson almost hourly, at least several times a day. So if the international rescue teams will come, they will be in the line of fire. And I don't think that's an acceptable situation. As for the second part of the question, I think it's just to you, and the world is kind of slow. So people don't understand yet the consequences. They don't understand the scale of environmental damage there, because there are chemicals there, there are cemeteries there, there's a lot of farmers there, so there are pigs with it just like goes on, and of course there are mines there, so there are mines floating in the water. It's a complete disaster, and I was listening and writing a report all day long today, and most environmental scientists say that it will take decades to resolve that. The world just didn't catch up yet. So, yeah.
I mean, it is front page news on the New York Times. This is
It better be.
heartbreaking.
But it's just not there yet because it's just too much for us to. It's like Chernobyl. We don't know immediately. But there was a question there somewhere. But
Oh,
Yeah.
when you were telling about Snake Island, I wanted to ask what happens to that Russian warship.
yes, it was called Moskva, and there are a lot of wonderful songs written about it. It burned and went down. Again. And there was a lot of rejoicing going on and dancing to it. And and I mean, some of you might be questioning and too nice to ask or polite to ask, or somebody who's watching it at home might ask, like, I sound pretty cold and not showing any compassion to the Russian soldiers who are being killed there, or the Russian ships that are being drowned. And that is simply the way it goes. If somebody bombards you for 15 months, it's very, very hard to continue to feel compassion for people who continue to do the damage of that scale of what they're doing in Kherson now. When you've seen a number of injured pregnant women, and I mean, okay, I'm not gonna, it's like getting late, I'm gonna tell you horror stories, but let's say I've seen enough death not to feel compassion to people who caused this death for whatever reason it happened. And that's again me. But that I think is also important to admit. And there are different journalists, some still have different kind of feelings, but I guess that's me.
How personalized is the hatred of Putin? I mean,
Oh, it's very personalized. It can't be any more personalized. I mean, at this point, it applies to the rest of the country, of the aggressor, but Putin in particular. If the hate that the people of Ukraine and myself feel towards this individual could be in some way materialized, like the spirit of Ukrainian people, there would be nothing left. Believe me.
that would be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of graffiti is there?
All kinds. Yeah. Wonderful. Like in Kherson River Port, where we got under fire, right after we were getting under fire, I was taking pictures of graffiti. And they're all kind, the LGBTQ, which is very popular with the young people, the flags, poetry, a lot of poetry, a lot of curses, a lot of, anti-Putin memes and stuff. All kind. There's also, say, in Odessa, I was telling somebody today, but not here, there's people came up with this cat, because cats, Odessa is a seaport, and there are a lot of cats everywhere, and they are adored, worshipped. They rule the city. They're everywhere outside. They're little like palaces where the cats reside, and everybody walks around with a little baggie and feed the cats, and they are fat, and they're so wonderful. Yeah, like I think I mentioned this lady who lives in the kiosk, in the flower kiosk, who is allowed not to go away for the curfew because she has a cat, Soma, and she has to protect the cat, otherwise he goes outside. So, in Odessa, the artist came up with a graffiti of a cat, and this cat is a patriotic cat, and it takes on different faces and looks. It's a pirate cat, it's a soldier cat, it's a musician cat, and so it's everywhere, and it's very creative, and yeah, it's fun. There's a lot of fun. That's what I want to maybe like also. I hope I was able to get the idea to you that there's a lot of fun. Ukrainians are very fun-loving people. My most popular video that got over 1 million views was of Ukrainian people singing at the railway station around the New Year times, singing and dancing. It was like 2 minutes, but it was so contagious. It was just like you cannot not dance alone. But at the same time, when I was filming it, I was crying because it's it's tragic, but they were having fun. They were not crying. They were just like actually having fun. So yeah, there's.
Is there, during the occupation of Iraq, there was an expression. I mean, there were lots of dark humor among Iraqis, but one was, "Today is better than tomorrow." Do they have similar expressions in the?
Well, they have an expression, "Shomayama, shomayama." We have what we have. It is what it is.
Right.
And they have a lot of sayings, like, and
That come from the war itself?
probably, I mean, just a lot of, upbeat and все будет Украина, like everything will be Ukraine, which means everything will be okay. So we say to each other, when something is flying and balalaika, like, boom, the drones, and there's no light and it's cold, it's like, yeah, все будет Украина.
That's good.
Yeah. Any last question?
How big is the community of journalists? Are there 1,000 foreign journalists, or 100?
Well, judging by the numbers, because they change your number of the accreditation, it's like they just changed mine, and it's like in 13,000. But some just come for 2 days. Very few people just come and stay, and we know each other. We know who we are. But a lot of people, I call them, the visitors, the visiting circus, And that's the problem with it. It's a very good point. I'll finish with that. When you see the reports, do know that a lot of the very good journalists who come to report, they don't only report on Ukraine. They report from around the world. They don't know the language. They don't know the nuances of history or geography or anything like that. They're there for 2 or 3 days. They are going wherever their fixer, which is a producer, local producer, will take them. And oftentimes the fixers have been working for 15 months. Like, I'm not going to go, like Bakhmut under fire. I'm just going to take them around the corner where, like, Vasa will tell them, what he already told everybody else. And I'm going to be paid, my money, and I want to go home. So, and then sometimes the translation is not that great and things get lost in translation. I've heard that a lot. And as a result, the nuances are gone for sure. There's some very basic truths that are reaching here. And then they're boiled down to fit into ratings and stuff. I worked for CBS News at some point, so I know how it's done. It's never too sophisticated. But there's still very good journalism. I recommend The Guardian. My colleague and friend Luke Harden is amazing. Like, whenever he writes something, do read that. He speaks Russian. He now understands Ukrainian. He's been at it for decades.
What is his name again?
Luke Harding. Yeah. John Sweeney, who is a former BBC journalist, who is my colleague and co-crew member on the film that I'm introducing. He's famous for making both Trump and Putin run away from him, Trump twice. He's just that kind of a person. He's just that kind of a person. Like, sometimes I felt like running away from him. But, I mean, he just wrote the book, The Killer in the Kremlin, bestseller, on top of the ratings for a long time, so I recommend that. Who else is good? I mean, I guess The Guardian is my favorite. Well, Byline Times, we have a group of good journalists, and it doesn't only include myself. There are other journalists there as well, and we are there. The people who stay there, and that gives you a certain advantage because you know what you're talking about. And then Euromaidan Press is amazing because these are Ukrainian journalists who actually do know what they're talking about in English. So, yes.
Hi, what can we do? We're Americans, we're here in this nice city, and what can we do to help?
Thank you. This is a great, great question. I'm very, very grateful that you're asking it. And of course, I feel bad, and I never do fundraising. I'm not a fundraiser type of person. I don't deal well with money and never run it. But right now, with Kherson situation going on, I have to say, unless you can send a boat there, probably the best thing to send is the money. And what I was going to do, like after a little break, I was going to bring some books of mine, which are actually about Odessa or about Ukraine and stuff. And donation, like if you want to do that, that's the way. There are also a lot of charities, if you prefer to do it online, tons of them. Like one of the charities for which I was going to fundraise before the Kherson disaster happened is an amazing group of 2 or 3 people, British and American, who sold everything they had, moved to Ukraine. Some of them don't speak Ukrainian, never been there, bought an old ambulance and delivered drinking water to the city of Siversk in Donbass, where people live in basements. And we went with them there. And they're going twice a day under fire. Under fire, I know that because we were there and we were recording that. And they risk their lives twice a day to deliver water to this elderly, mostly people who are staying there with their animals. And I think they're heroes. They sleep there in Kramatorsk on the floor under fire. So I will share the link to their charity. And I think that's a very, and you know, sometimes you don't want to transfer money somewhere you don't know where it goes. This I've seen, there's a film, I mean, I know exactly where it's going to, so I'll share that. There's a great organization called Nova Ukraine, which is big here. And I've seen them at work in Ukraine in several cities. They do all kind of things from rescue to psychological help. And that's a big organization. There's another one I forgot right now. I'll share them. The ones that I know, I'll share in the event for anybody who wants to donate.
I don't know, I hope this doesn't sound offensive, but I'm wondering, are there similarities between the Ukrainian language and the Russian language?
Yes, yeah, they're Slavic languages, and there are a lot of similarities. I actually studied Old Slavic in school, and this is the language which was a foundation for all the other Slavic languages. So there are roots, certain roots that are similar, but there would be like Germanic languages. English and German have similar roots. I'm speaking as a linguist. So they belong to the same group, but the grammar is different. And there are different languages, but they belong to the same group.
Yeah, and was there an effort to suppress the Ukrainian language under Russian rule or Soviet rule?
Yes, it was suppressed. It was suppressed for a very long time, Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture. Yeah, and that's right now Putin actually states that it doesn't exist, that Ukraine doesn't exist as a country, and they impose Russian language and Russian culture on the occupied territories in schools and then cultural establishment. And it's a very big subject, so I won't be able to cover it all in depth now, but it's certainly a fact. Yeah.
So, while on the ground in Ukraine, have you perhaps gained any first-hand knowledge of the fate of Roma people, right?
Of what? Sorry, a little louder.
Ukrainian Roma population, which we know is a substantial minority in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean,
They're facing any specific hardships specific to their situation?
I mean, there are Roma people there, like everywhere else in Eastern Europe. I think they're facing, frankly, the same difficulties as all the other ethnic groups. There are many ethnic groups there. The Jews, there are Tatars. They're actually, despite of general belief, there are people of color there, especially in Odessa, because it's a port city, it's international. There are a lot of Korean. There are different ethnic groups, and they are all equally suffering from the Russians. Yes?
Hi there. I'm one of the people who has a Ukrainian grandmother.
Welcome to the
yeah. She brought back the cowbell. So,
yeah.
But I would say that there's, with my parents and with my grandmother, was this like erasure of, after they left, it was just like goodbye. And it's kind of difficult for me because I feel the war like almost in my blood, but I feel a disconnect from that. And I'm wondering, those who have left, I don't know if you have spoken to any of Ukrainians who are now living abroad. Is there a sense of we're going to go back, or is there a sense of we're not going back ever?
Yes, it's a very good question. I think it's very different from the previous waves of immigration, because, say, the Soviet immigration, the Jews who immigrated during the USSR time is a completely different matter than it is now. And then there was another wave of the economic situation, because Ukraine was very poor. So there were a lot of people who would go to Europe to take some jobs that other people didn't want to do and make some money and bring it back. But right now, it's mostly people fleeing the danger. And a lot of people do come back. Like, I've been on ferries and I've been on trains with people who are coming back. I spoke to a lot of people who do want to eventually come back when they perceive the danger is gone. Not right now, pretty much every city is under fire on a daily basis. So it's only fair if you have small children to be living someplace else. But I've done some research, and there's a lot of statements that is one of the big demographic paradigm shift, because young women with young children leave, and oftentimes they get married or they meet other partners, or young women without children, just naturally happens. So there's a migration. And so it will lead, and then a lot of young men are being killed during the war. So Ukraine, once it wins, and I believe that it will win, it's just a matter of time, will face a lot of challenging situations, and the demographic situation and labor market will be one of them. Yes?
I just wanted to add one more thing in response to your question. So I volunteer for an organization called Sweetless, which helps Ukrainian refugees get benefits from the U.S. government. And they have benefits, but the other piece that governs their ability to stay here or not is our government approving more benefits and them being able to stay here. A lot of those benefits, if not everything, are expiring in September, and many people are unaware. And you all know how expensive it is to be in this country without medical care, without support, ESL, etc. So they don't have the same level of benefits that refugees did during my and potentially your immigration did when we were leaving from the Soviet Union. So that's another important point that many Americans are unaware of. While people are hoping to stay where it is safe, the question is whether our government is going to help support them while they're here and cover them medically, etc. And a lot of their benefits are also contingent upon, for instance, they get a part-time job, and then their healthcare disappears, and their option is to stay unemployed and poor, but have healthcare, or find a part-time job, make some money, but then not have healthcare. Many of them don't even have this knowledge about the benefits, so that's kind of something important to be aware of.
Most of them have temporary protected status as opposed to refugee status?
Yes, and there are various specific elements of that that are it's not the same as it was, and that keeps changing, and the governing bodies also don't know all of the intricacies, so they keep getting denied a lot of benefits on a regular as well.
Well, thank you for that. That's very important to add to the big picture, I think. So I see that a lot of people are starting to get, a little restless, which is understandable. It's a tough topic, and there's not a lot of air here. So a couple of organizational moments. I do want to invite you all to the premiere of the film on the 19th in Chinatown in the Great Star Theater. I will share the link in the event. I do want to bring the books from the car, which is in front. So after 3 minutes, I'll be here with some books and answer some more questions for anybody who wants to do that. And I will be sharing the charity links and also some pictures as promised, because I feel bad that I invited everybody for pictures and only gave you my verbal picture. So thank you for bearing with me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Слава Україні!